Breathe in and out, and let the world outside this moment gently fade away, like a distant shoreline sinking slowly beneath a soft grey horizon. Tonight, we are not here for the clamour of the present day, but for the deep, quiet echoes of the past. A past that lives and breathes in the cold, ancient waters of the North Sea. Let your mind drift, and let your body settle, as we begin a long and peaceful journey together, across a body of water that has been both a cradle of civilization and a final, silent resting place. There is no hurry here. There is only the slow, steady rhythm of the tides and the endless expanse of the sky above. Imagine, if you will, the first light of 1,000 different dawns, all happening at once. See how it illuminates the varied and dramatic coastlines that form the great basin of this historic sea. Picture the soft, pearlescent glow touching the top of the immense white chalk cliffs of southern England, ancient ramparts of stone that have watched the water for countless ages. Feel the cool, damp air. Taste the faint salt on the breeze. As the light slowly descends, revealing the gentle curve of the shore, where pebbles are turned over and over by the ceaseless, patient waves. This is a place of soft edges and muted colours, a landscape painted in watercolours of grey and blue and the pale, hopeful yellow of a new day. Now, let your thoughts travel northward, far to the rugged, untamed coast of the Scottish Highlands. Here, the land does not greet the sea with gentle slopes, but with stern, formidable cliffs of dark, weathered rock. The water here seems deeper, colder, and more profound. It speaks of a wilder, more elemental power. The wind carries the scent of heather and wet stone, and the only sounds are the cry of a lone gull and the deep, resonant boom of the swell as it breaks against the unyielding shore. It is a place of solitude and immense, quiet dignity, a testament to the enduring strength of the earth against the patient sea. From there we cross the vast open water in our minds, gliding over the surface toward the breathtaking majesty of the Norwegian fjords. Here, the sea transforms into something serene and almost spiritual. Great mountains, draped in shadow and mist, plunge directly into still, silent, and impossibly deep water. The fjords are like immense flooded valleys, sacred corridors where the water is a mirror, perfectly reflecting the sky, the stone, and the silent, watchful forests. The air is crisp and pure and still, and time itself seems to slow down, to pause in reverence for the profound, dreamlike beauty of this place. And finally, our gentle journey takes us south, to the low, flat coastlines of the Netherlands and Denmark. Lands born from the sea itself. Here, the horizon is a perfectly straight line, a simple, elegant brushstroke separating the vast, pale sky from the calm, shallow water. It is a landscape of subtle beauty, of wide open spaces, and an immense, overarching sense of peace. For centuries, the people here have lived in a delicate balance with the water, building dikes and canals, not to conquer the sea, but to live in harmony with its rhythms. It is a place of quiet perseverance, of human ingenuity, and of a deep, abiding respect for the patient and powerful presence of the sea. All of these coastlines, all of these different worlds, are bound together by this single, immense body of water. The North Sea. For millennia, it has been a bridge, a great, liquid highway connecting peoples and cultures and ideas. It has carried traders with their precious cargoes of amber and wool. It has borne explorers toward unknown horizons. And it has felt the passage of countless souls seeking new lives on distant shores. It has been a source of sustenance, a provider of bounty from its deep, cold gardens, and a wellspring of prosperity for the nations that line its shores. It has been a meeting place, a space of exchange, a theatre for the slow, unfolding drama of human history. But a bridge can also be a barrier, and the North Sea has always been a formidable and often unforgiving frontier. Its moods are legendary, capable of shifting from glassy calm to towering fury, with breathtaking speed. Its waters hold the chill of the Arctic, a cold that seeps into the bones and speaks of the immense, indifferent power of nature. It is a place that demands respect and rewards patience, and has never suffered fools gladly. The very same waters that have connected empires have also guarded them, isolating islands and protecting coastlines with a vast, grey moat that has shaped the destiny of nations. Tonight, however, we are not here to dwell on the storms or the battles. We are here for the quiet in-between moments, for the great, silent, and contemplative spirit of the sea itself. We are here to listen to its deeper story, the story of the quiet, the lost, and the forgotten. Beneath its restless surface, the North Sea holds a vast and silent museum. It is a drowned world, a seabed that cradles the bones of prehistoric forests, the wrecks of ancient longships, the proud galleons, the mighty warships, and the humble fishing boats. All of them now sleeping peacefully in the cold, dark, silent depths. Each of these silent wrecks is a story, a final frozen moment in time, a story of courage, of tragedy, of ordinary lives caught in extraordinary circumstances. The sea is the keeper of these stories. It holds them in a close, silent embrace, preserving them in the darkness, far from the light of the sun and the noise of the world. And as we continue our journey tonight, we will gently and quietly seek out these stories, not to disturb their slumber, but to honor their memory and to understand the profound and often sorrowful history that is written on the floor of this great sea. So let go of the day. Let your breathing be as slow and as steady as the turning of the tide. Let the gentle rocking of our narrative carry you out, away from the shore, into the deep, peaceful, and historic heart of the North Sea. There is nothing to do now, but to listen and to drift, as the grey horizon envelops us, and the ancient quiet whispers of the water begin to tell their tale, a tale of deep water, and of the long, long sleep that follows a life upon its waves. Let us now travel back, much further back, to a time that lies beyond the reach of written memory, a time held only in the silent testimony of ice and stone and the deep, cold mud of the seabed. Before the age of kings and empires, long before the first words were written down to chronicle the deeds of men, the North Sea was not as we know it today. It was a different world entirely, a place still being slowly, patiently, sculpted by the hand of time. The Britain we know was not yet an island, but was tethered to the vast European continent by a sweeping expanse of low-lying plains, a gentle landscape of rolling hills, marshlands, and winding rivers, a lost country that we now call Doggerland. For thousands of years, this was a human world, a place where small, nomadic bands of hunter-gatherers followed the herds of mammoth and reindeer through immense, primeval forests of birch and pine. Their world was one of earth and sky, and the water was not a barrier, but merely a feature of the land, a river to be crossed, a lake from which to drink. But slowly, imperceptibly, something was changing. The great ice sheets that had covered so much of the world were melting, and with each passing century, with each passing generation, the sea began to rise. It was not a sudden, violent flood, but a slow, relentless advance, a gradual drowning of the known world that must have seemed both mysterious and utterly inevitable. The great plains of Doggerland began to shrink, the valleys becoming estuaries, the hills transforming into islands. And for the people who lived there, a choice had to be made. A choice between retreat or adaptation. It was in this crucible of necessity, in this slow-motion crisis of a disappearing homeland, that the first true voyages upon the North Sea were likely born. These were not journeys of conquest, nor were they voyages of discovery in the way we might think of them. They were voyages of survival, of memory, and of connection. Desperate attempts to maintain contact with communities now separated by the ever-widening water, or brave ventures into the unknown in search of new hunting grounds and new, safer shores. The vessels they built were as humble as their purpose was profound. Imagine a great tree, felled by hand with tools of sharpened stone, its trunk painstakingly hollowed out by fire and scraping, day after day, until it formed a heavy, stable, but profoundly vulnerable craft. A simple logboat. Feel the rough, charred texture of the inner hull, smell the scent of pine resin and damp earth, or perhaps picture a delicate frame of bent willow or ash, lashed together with leather thongs, over which the taut, scraped hide of an animal was stretched and made waterproof with fat and tar. These were boats that were not separate from the natural world, but were a part of it, a fusion of wood and bone and sinew and immense human effort. These were the vessels that made the first tentative crossings, small, fragile shells of wood and skin, carrying a handful of souls across the vast, grey, and often unforgiving expanse of the newly forming sea. In 1937, on the muddy banks of the Humber estuary in England, the silent memory of just such a journey was unearthed. The Ferriby boats, as they came to be known, are a breathtaking glimpse into this deep past. They were not hollowed logs, but something far more sophisticated. Long, elegant planks of oak, stitched together with flexible branches of yew, the seams caulked with moss and sealed with tar. These were the work of master craftspeople, a people who understood the water, who knew its moods, and who had learned, through generations of trial and error, how to build a vessel that could live upon its surface. To look upon the remains of the Ferriby boats is to feel a connection, a quiet sense of awe for these forgotten pioneers who entrusted their lives to such elegant but fragile creations. And think for a moment of the sheer courage it must have taken to leave the safety of the shoreline, the solid and dependable earth, and to push out into the great unknown. There were no maps to guide them, no compasses to point the way. Their navigation was a deep, intuitive conversation with the world around them. It was the patient observation of the sun's arc across the sky during the day, and the slow, majestic wheeling of the stars at night. It was the knowledge of prevailing winds, and the subtle changes in the color and swell of the water that might signal shallower depths, or an approaching coast. They would have watched the flight of seabirds, knowing that their paths could lead to unseen land, and they would have held the shape of the coastline in their minds, a mental map passed down through generations. Their voyages were a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a quiet declaration that even a rising sea could not sever the bonds of kinship, or extinguish the spark of curiosity. These were not warriors, but families. They were not admirals, but simple mariners, whose names we will never know, and whose individual stories have been washed away by the tides of time. Yet, their legacy endured. Each successful crossing, each safe return, added another thread to a growing tapestry of knowledge. The paths they charted with their eyes and their instincts became the first sea lanes, invisible roads upon the water that would be travelled and expanded upon by all who followed. From these first tentative steps, born of necessity and quiet courage, the North Sea began its long transformation, from a formless, feared expanse into a familiar highway, a place of passage that would soon echo with the shouts of raiders and the creak of Viking longships carrying a new and far more aggressive ambition across its waters. The quiet age of hesitant crossings, of simple survival against the rising waters, was slowly, imperceptibly, drawing to a close. And as the memory of Doggerland finally sank beneath the waves, a new sound began to echo across the grey expanse of the North Sea, a sound not of fearful necessity, but of focused, unwavering ambition, the steady, rhythmic pulse of countless oars, dipping and rising in perfect, disciplined unison. A new people had claimed this water as their own, transforming its unpredictable and dangerous surface into a great northern highway, a road of waves that would carry them toward destiny and forever change the world. This was the dawn of the Viking Age. At the very heart of this new era was a masterpiece of naval architecture, a creation of such terrible, streamlined beauty that it has captured the imagination for 1,000 years, the longship. It was not a boat in the way the Ferriby vessels were boats. It was a weapon, a vessel of exploration, and a home, all fused into one elegant and terrifyingly effective form. Picture its long, slender body, built not from heavy, solid timbers, but from overlapping oak planks, a method known as clinker building, which gave the hull a remarkable flexibility. The longship did not fight the waves. It flexed with them, riding the great ocean swells with the fluid grace of a living creature. Its high, curving prow, often carved into the fearsome head of a dragon or serpent, was designed to strike dread into the hearts of those who saw it approaching from the sea, a symbol of the raw, untamed power that it carried. The genius of the longship, however, lay in its profound duality. It possessed a strong, solid keel, the central spine of the ship, which gave it the stability it needed to survive the violent storms of the open ocean and to carry its single immense square sail on long voyages across the horizon. Yet for all its strength, the ship had a remarkably shallow draft, meaning its hull sat high in the water. This allowed it to navigate not just the deep sea, but also the shallow coastal waters, and most importantly, to venture far inland, gliding silently up the winding rivers of England and Scotland and the Kingdom of Francia, bringing its hardened crews to the very doorstep of wealthy, unsuspecting monasteries and towns. It was a vessel perfectly conceived for its environment, a key that could unlock both the ocean and the land. With this incredible tool at their command, the Norse seafarers etched new pathways across the North Sea. They learned its currents, its winds, and its moods with an intimacy born of countless journeys. From the deep fjords of Norway they sailed west, a journey of 200 miles across open, unforgiving water, to the Shetland and Orkney Islands, which became vital stepping stones for voyages further south. From Denmark they crossed to the coast of Anglo-Saxon England, a land of rival kingdoms, rich in silver and fertile soil. The journey was a rite of passage, a testament to skill and endurance, guided by the sun, the stars, and an unwavering confidence in their vessel and their own seafaring prowess. The romantic image of the Viking explorer, however, must always be tempered by the harsh and sorrowful reality of the Viking raider. For the monks of Lindisfarne, a holy island off the English coast, the arrival of these elegant ships in the year 793 was not a thing of beauty, but a vision of terror, a violent storm that seemed to rise not from the heavens, but from the sea itself. The longships that appeared on their horizon were the harbingers of a new and frightening age, an age where the sea no longer offered protection, but instead delivered swift and merciless devastation. For 2 centuries, the coastal communities of the North Sea lived in the shadow of this threat, their prayers filled with a new and desperate plea to be delivered from the fury of the Northmen. But the ambition of the Norse people eventually grew beyond simple plunder. In the middle of the 9th century, the nature of their voyages began to shift, from fleeting raids to a determined campaign of conquest and settlement. A great fleet, larger than any seen before, gathered to descend upon England. It was not an army in the traditional sense, but an alliance of warbands, a vast coalition of seafarers who came not just to take, but to stay. The Anglo-Saxon chronicles called them the Great Heathen Army, and their arrival marked a permanent, transformative change. They fought their way across the kingdoms, and where they conquered, they put down roots, establishing a territory known as the Danelaw, where their own laws, customs, and language took hold. The warrior slowly began the work of the farmer. The raider became a trader. Great and prosperous cities like Jorvik, what we now call York, grew from their fortified settlements, becoming bustling hubs of commerce and craft. The same sea lanes that had once carried warriors in search of silver now carried merchants trading in furs and walrus ivory and fine English wool. The North Sea was no longer just a path for raiding. It was a complex network of trade routes connecting Scandinavia not just to Britain, but to Ireland, to Iceland, and to the wider world. The Viking highway was now open for business, and as the age of the raider slowly began to fade, giving way to the age of the settler and the merchant, the dragon-headed prows of the longships would soon be joined by new and different silhouettes on the horizon. Sturdier, deeper ships, designed not for speed and surprise, but for the peaceful and profitable pursuit of trade. The age of the dragon-prowed longship did not end in a sudden fiery cataclysm, but rather it slowly faded, its echoes absorbed into the rising hum of a new and different kind of power, a power measured not in conquered lands, but in profit and loss, in contracts and credit. The Viking highway, once a path of warriors, was being paved over, transformed into a meticulously managed corridor of commerce by a new and formidable force that wielded ledgers and influence instead of swords and axes. This was the Hanseatic League, a remarkable and powerful confederation, not of nations, but of merchant guilds and market towns, all bound together by a solemn promise of mutual protection and the relentless pursuit of prosperity. This was a quiet empire, an empire without a single king or a central capital, its authority woven like a great, invisible net across the whole of the North Sea and the Baltic. Its heartlands were the powerful free cities of northern Germany, chief among them the magnificent port of Lübeck, the crowned queen of the Hansa, its tall brick Gothic spires reaching for a northern sky. From there, its influence radiated outwards, to Hamburg on the river Elbe, to Bremen, and westward to bustling Bruges in Flanders, where canals served as liquid streets, and eastward to Novgorod, deep within the Russian lands. These cities were the glittering jewels in the League's crown, centers of immense wealth, where the fortunes of northern Europe were made and managed with sober, careful precision. This new age was carried upon the back of a new vessel, a ship with none of the longship's predatory grace, but with a quiet, unflinching strength all its own. This was the cog. Imagine a vessel that was the very embodiment of practicality, a sturdy, pot-bellied, high-sided ship, built of heavy, overlapping planks, with a single immense mast carrying a vast, rectangular sail. It was not built for speed, nor for elegance. It was a floating warehouse, a beast of burden designed for one purpose, to move the immense wealth of northern Europe safely across the water. Its high sides made it difficult for pirates to board, and its deep, rounded hull could hold a staggering volume of cargo, the lifeblood of the League's immense trading network. The holds of these dependable ships were filled with the foundational materials of medieval life. From England came enormous bales of raw, coarse wool, destined for the master weavers of Flanders. From the vast, dark forests of Scandinavia and Russia came fragrant timber for building houses and ships, and rich, luxurious furs to warm the shoulders of princes and bishops. From the silver mines of Germany came the hard currency that fueled the entire enterprise, while from France came barrels of fine wine. And perhaps most vital of all was the salt, the white gold of the Middle Ages, harvested from the salt springs of Lüneburg, Lohneburg, and shipped from the docks of Lübeck, essential for preserving the great herring catches of the North Sea, and thus for feeding a continent. Yet, for all its organization and all its careful planning, the sea remained a place of profound and constant danger. The Hanseatic merchant lived with a deep and abiding awareness of risk. The same unpredictable weather that had plagued the first mariners continued its reign. Sudden, violent storms could appear with little warning, driving ships onto treacherous, shifting sandbanks, or shattering their masts in the open water. And a dense, disorienting North Sea fog could descend in moments, blinding navigators and leading to terrifying collisions in the crowded shipping lanes. These were the timeless dangers of the sea, an unavoidable cost of doing business upon its waves. But there was another, more personal threat: the constant menace of piracy. The sea lanes, so rich with cargo, were a tempting hunting ground for desperate and ruthless men. A merchant's entire fortune, the work of a lifetime, could be lost in a single, violent encounter. The Hanseatic League, however, was not an entity to suffer such losses passively. In a remarkable display of their collective power, the member cities pooled their immense resources to police their own trade routes. They built the first lighthouses on the treacherous coasts. They commissioned the creation of ever more accurate sea charts, and when necessary, they funded their own powerful warships, great cogs refitted for battle, to hunt down pirate fleets and bring them to justice. This was the League at its zenith, a state-like power, able to command armies and navies, all in the service of safe and profitable trade. But the very success of the Hansa, the immense wealth it generated and controlled, sowed the seeds of its own slow decline. For kings and queens in London, Paris, and Copenhagen began to look upon the League's power not with gratitude, but with envy. They started to build their own merchant fleets, and more importantly, their own professional navies, determined to control the trade that occurred within their own borders and along their own coastlines. The age of the merchant prince was slowly giving way to the age of the monarch, and the sturdy, dependable cog would soon find itself sailing in the long, formidable shadow of the warship and the national navy. The great, unified highway of the Hansa was beginning to fracture, its traffic soon to be challenged by the ambitions of powerful, centralized nations, each eager for its own piece of the North Sea's enduring bounty. The slow, steady pulse of commerce, which had for so long defined the rhythm of the North Sea, was beginning to change its beat. A new and more urgent cadence was sounding across the waves, a deeper, more resonant thrum that spoke not of shared prosperity, but of singular national ambition. The quiet fellowship of the Hanseatic guilds, with its focus on mutual benefit and careful trade, was being overshadowed by the rise of powerful, centralized monarchies, each with its own flag, its own treasury, and its own newly forged navy. The sea was no longer simply a space to be shared. It was becoming a territory to be owned, a great, grey chessboard upon which the fates of proud and rising nations would be decided. This profound shift in purpose demanded a new and more formidable kind of vessel. The era of the sturdy, dependable cog was drawing to a close, and in its place rose a ship that was not merely a floating warehouse, but a floating fortress. The galleon. Picture in your mind a ship of towering complexity and immense, intimidating height. It was a vessel of multiple decks, its hull curving upwards to form high, fortified structures at the bow, and especially at the stern, the forecastle and the towering sterncastle. These were not built to shelter merchants from the rain, but to give archers and soldiers a commanding height advantage in battle. And down the length of its powerful hull, a new and terrible feature appeared. Rows of square portholes, which could be opened to reveal the dark, iron mouths of heavy cannons. The galleon was a creature of war, a sea-born instrument of a king's will, designed not to trade peacefully, but to dominate, to intimidate, and, when called upon, to unleash a terrifying broadside of fire and iron. The North Sea and its vital gateway, the English Channel, soon became the primary stage for the unfolding rivalry between these new naval powers, most notably the devout Catholic Empire of Spain and the defiant Protestant Kingdom of England. This was a conflict of faith, of treasure, and of destiny, and it reached its fateful climax in the summer of 1588. From the ports of Spain came the largest fleet Europe had ever witnessed, 130 ships carrying 30,000 men, a force so grand, so overwhelming, that it was christened the Armada Invincible, the Invincible Armada. Its mission was divine and absolute: to cross the Channel, to defeat the upstart English navy, and to clear the way for an invasion that would return England to the old faith. Imagine the slow, majestic, and terrifying spectacle of its approach. A great, crescent-shaped formation of towering galleons and supply ships, moving with a ponderous, inexorable certainty up the English Channel. Against this floating city, the English ships seemed small, almost fragile. But they were faster, more nimble, and commanded by men who knew the currents and coastlines of their home waters with an unmatched intimacy. They did not seek a direct, decisive battle in the old style. Instead, they harried the Armada's flanks, their long-range cannons chipping away at the Spanish giants, a swarm of wasps tormenting a great, lumbering bear. After a week of this running conflict, the Armada anchored in the waters off Gravelines, Gravelines, near Calais, waiting to rendezvous with its invasion army. It was there, in the dead of night, that the English unleashed a new and terrifying weapon. Fire ships, old vessels deliberately set ablaze and sent drifting on the tide directly into the heart of the anchored fleet. No great battle was fought, but in the ensuing panic, the Armada's perfect formation was broken. The Spanish captains cut their anchor cables, and their ships scattered into the unforgiving waters of the North Sea. It was then that the sea itself, the great, grey, impartial arbiter of so many fates, seemed to make its own decision. A powerful southwesterly wind, a wind the English would later call the Protestant wind, began to blow, preventing the scattered fleet from regrouping and forcing it northward into the cold, unfamiliar, and storm-racked seas around Scotland and Ireland. The planned invasion had failed, and what followed was a long, slow, and sorrowful journey of destruction, as the great Armada was savaged not by cannon fire, but by the immense power of the ocean. Ship after ship was wrecked upon the rocky shores, their crews lost to the freezing waves, their dreams of conquest broken and drowned. The defeat of the Armada, however, did not bring peace to the North Sea. It merely confirmed a new reality, that naval power was now the key to national survival and prosperity. In the century that followed, a new rivalry bloomed, this time between England and the newly independent and astonishingly wealthy Dutch Republic. This was not a war of faith, but a bitter, grinding struggle for commercial supremacy, a fight between two nations of master mariners for control of the very sea lanes that generated their fortunes. 3 great Anglo-Dutch wars were fought across the middle of the 17th century, turning vast stretches of the North Sea into chaotic, smoke-filled arenas of naval combat. These were battles on an unimaginable scale, sometimes involving hundreds of ships on each side, their cannons thundering for days on end, until the water was thick with splinters and wreckage and the profound, silent tragedy of lost life. And so, with each passing conflict, with each technological advance, with each new national ambition, the sea became ever more crowded with these great, powerful, and vulnerable creations of wood and sail. The arms race between nations filled the shipping lanes with vessels of unprecedented size and power, but also of unprecedented complexity. And with more ships sailing in ever more dangerous conditions of war and competition, came more shipwrecks. The cold, silent bed of the North Sea was becoming a vast and growing archive of this new and violent age, its dark sands slowly, patiently, beginning to collect the immense fallen bodies of these proud, timbered giants, each one a monument to the rising tide of human conflict. The wars of kings and the rivalries of empires brought a new and deliberate violence to the North Sea, turning its waters into a theatre of human conflict. Yet, for all the thunder of their cannons and the towering pride of their great naval fleets, the nations of Europe were never the true masters of this domain. There remained a greater, more ancient, and infinitely more powerful sovereign, the weather itself. And every so often, as if to remind the world of its ultimate authority, the sea and the sky would unite in a display of such terrifying fury that the ambitions of men would be rendered utterly and tragically insignificant. The winter months on the North Sea have always been a time of profound challenge, a season when the water seems to hold a deeper, more menacing chill, and the sky is a canvas of shifting, somber greys. The days grow short, the nights long and dark, and the chances of a sudden violent gale increase with each passing week. For the sailors of the Age of Sail, it was a period of immense hardship and constant vigilance. The work of managing the vast, heavy canvas sails became a brutal, life-threatening struggle against freezing winds and icy spray. Ropes would stiffen and freeze, fingers would grow numb, and a single misstep on a slick pitching deck could mean a final, fatal plunge into the unforgiving water below. Every voyage was a calculated risk, a gamble against the formidable power of a winter storm. In the final week of November, in the year 1703, that gamble was lost on a scale that horrified a generation and sent a deep shudder through the maritime heart of Great Britain. For 2 weeks, a relentless series of low-pressure systems had been swirling across the Atlantic, gathering strength before finally merging into a single, monstrous tempest. A storm of such incredible violence and extent that it would be remembered for centuries simply as the Great Storm. It was a hurricane, not in the tropical sense, but in its sheer, devastating force, and it fell upon southern England and the crowded waters of the English Channel and the North Sea with an almost biblical wrath. Imagine the sound of it. A deafening, shrieking roar of wind that tore the tiles from thousands of roofs, flattened entire forests, and sent church steeples toppling into the streets. But for those at sea, there was no shelter, no refuge. Out on the water, the storm was a scene of pure, elemental chaos. The wind, estimated to have reached speeds well over 100 miles per hour, whipped the surface of the sea into a frenzy of enormous, mountainous waves. These were not the rolling swells of a normal gale, but steep, jagged, and chaotic seas that seemed to attack from all directions at once, capable of breaking the back of even the strongest ship and swamping any vessel caught in their path. Anchored in the coastal anchorages and caught out in the open sea was a significant portion of the British Royal Navy, the very symbol of the nation's power and security. But against the fury of the great storm, these mighty warships were revealed to be as fragile as any other vessel. One by one, they began to succumb. On the treacherous Goodwin Sands, a notorious and shifting graveyard of ships off the Kentish coast, a squadron of naval vessels had sought what they hoped was safe anchorage. But as the storm reached its peak, their anchors began to drag, and their heavy anchor cables began to snap, one by one, like threads. Among them was the HMS Stirling Castle, a 70-gun third-rate ship of the line, a veteran of recent battles, and a proud vessel carrying a crew of over 350 men. In the howling darkness, she was driven relentlessly toward the sands, until with a series of sickening groans and the shriek of tortured timber, her hull struck the bottom. The immense waves then began the slow, brutal work of her destruction, sweeping over her decks, tearing away her masts, and washing her desperate crew into the churning, freezing chaos of the sea. By morning, the Stirling Castle had been utterly consumed by the sand and the waves, and of her entire crew, only 70 men had managed to survive, clinging to wreckage until they were rescued. She was not alone in her fate. Nearby, the HMS Northumberland and the HMS Restoration met the same end, their powerful hulls broken apart, and their crews almost entirely lost. In all, the Royal Navy lost 13 ships, and with them, more than 1,500 highly skilled sailors, a catastrophic loss of life far greater than in many of the famous naval battles of the age. The Great Storm of 1703 was a profound and humbling national trauma. It revealed, in the most brutal way imaginable, the ultimate vulnerability of a maritime nation to the whims of nature. It served as a stark and sorrowful lesson that no amount of naval power, no victory in battle, could truly conquer the sea itself. In the wake of the disaster, a new focus was placed on building more protected harbours, and on the slow, painstaking process of trying to understand and predict the weather. But true, reliable forecasting was still a distant dream. For more than a century to come, the fate of every ship and every sailor would continue to rest upon the captain's skill, the strength of his vessel, and the profound, unpredictable, and often merciless temper of the North Sea. The age of wood and wind was approaching its twilight, and a new technology, born of fire and iron, was waiting on the horizon, a technology that promised to finally tame the waves, but which would soon discover its own new ways to fail. The age of sail did not surrender its dominion all at once. Rather, its power ebbed away slowly, like a great, outgoing tide, leaving behind a world that was forever changed. For a new sound was beginning to echo across the water, a sound that cared little for the direction of the wind or the moods of the sky. It was a deep, rhythmic, and unwavering pulse. The sound of the steam engine. The Industrial Revolution, which had filled the cities with the smoke of 1,000 factories, was now turning its gaze to the sea, promising a new era of mastery over the waves, an age of certainty, reliability, and power, carried forth in vessels made not of wood, but of iron and steel. Imagine for a moment the profound transformation this represented. For millennia, humanity's relationship with the sea had been a negotiation, a partnership born of respect, and often of fear. The steamship declared that negotiation to be over. Here was a vessel whose heart was a furnace, its breath was steam, and its muscles were pistons of polished steel. It did not need to wait for a favorable breeze. It created its own wind, its great paddle wheels or churning propeller, driving it forward with a relentless mechanical purpose, leaving a trail of dark, billowing smoke in its wake, like a signature upon the sky. Its hull, forged from plates of riveted iron, and later of seamless steel, seemed to mock the waves, offering a promise of brute strength and imperviousness that no oak-hulled ship could ever match. The journey from London to Hamburg would no longer be a matter of days or weeks, subject to the whims of a gale. It would be a matter of hours, precise and predictable, recorded on a printed schedule. This newfound reliability fueled an explosion of traffic. As the great factories of Britain, Germany, and Belgium churned out immense quantities of manufactured goods, the North Sea became a vast, intricate conveyor belt, its surface crisscrossed by the wakes of countless steamships. The quiet sea lanes of the past were becoming crowded, bustling boulevards, alive with the passage of passenger liners, cargo freighters, and small, puffing coastal traders. The silence of the open water was replaced by a new and constant, low-frequency hum of relentless mechanical progress. It was an age of supreme confidence, a time when it seemed that human ingenuity had finally truly tamed the ancient wilderness of the sea. But technology is a double-edged sword, and every new solution brings with it a new and often unforeseen problem. These new iron ships were heavier, and they moved much faster. While they were stronger, they were also more brittle than wood, and their momentum was immense. A sailing ship could, in an emergency, spill the wind from its sails and slow with relative speed. A steamship, its great engine driving it forward, could not. And in the crowded shipping lanes, this combination of speed, weight, and inflexibility created a new and terrifying mathematics of collision. The sea had not been tamed, the dangers had simply been redefined. Let us focus our thoughts now on a single, fateful night. A night in the deep winter of 1895. A night that would serve as a tragic lesson in the hubris of this new age. The German passenger liner, the SS Elbe, was a source of immense national pride, a beacon of engineering from the shipyards of Glasgow, steaming from Bremerhaven on its way to New York. On board were over 350 passengers and crew, a small floating world of hopes and dreams. German families seeking a new life in America, British merchants returning from business on the continent, all of them secure in the warmth and light of a vessel that represented the very pinnacle of modern safety and comfort. But as the Elbe steamed through the cold, dark waters off the Dutch coast, the sea brought forth its most ancient and bewildering shroud, a dense, silent, and impenetrable fog. In the age of sail, a captain might have shortened his sails or dropped anchor to wait for the fog to lift. But this was the age of steam, an age of schedules and timetables. The Elbe pressed on, its powerful engine pushing it forward at a steady 10 knots, its steam whistle sounding its lonely, mournful cry into the thick, disorienting blackness. And somewhere else out in that same cold, blind world, another steamship, the British collier Crathie, was doing the very same. What happened next was not a battle, nor a struggle, but a sudden, horrifying intersection of two invisible, fast-moving points. Through the fog, the lights of the Elbe appeared to the Crathie's crew when it was already far too late. The smaller collier, its bow laden with coal, struck the grand passenger liner just abaft the engine room with a sound that was utterly alien to the age of sail. Not the splintering groan of wood, but the catastrophic shriek of tearing steel. It was a brutal, instantaneous violation. The Crathie, though damaged, remained afloat. But for the magnificent Elbe, the wound was mortal. The cold, dark water poured in, not as a leak, but as a flood, and the great liner, a symbol of human mastery over nature, began to sink with terrifying speed. In the chaos and the darkness, in the freezing, fog-bound water, only 20 people survived. Over 330 souls, each with a story, a destination, were delivered instead into the silent, freezing embrace of the North Sea. The sinking of the SS Elba was a tragedy that sent a shockwave of grief and disbelief across Europe. It was a stark reminder that the new technologies of steam and steel had not eliminated the sea's dangers. They had simply made them faster, heavier, and in some ways, even more unforgiving. The very steel that could build a great liner, a vessel of peace and connection, could also be used to forge the armored hull of a battleship. The engine that drove commerce could also drive a vessel of war at a speed and with a purpose previously unimaginable. The 20th century was dawning, and it was bringing with it a new and far more terrible purpose for these powerful machines, preparing to turn the crowded commercial highway of the North Sea into a vast and lethal battlefield. The confidence of the industrial age, which had so boldly declared its mastery over the sea, was about to be turned inward upon itself, transforming the North Sea from a stage of commercial rivalry into a vast, grey, and lethal arena for total war. The same ingenuity that had created the passenger liner and the cargo freighter had also been hard at work, forging new and terrifying instruments of destruction. And this cold, northern sea would become the primary testing ground for a new and brutal form of naval conflict. For 4 long years, from 1914 to 1918, the waters between Britain and Germany would become a frontier of fear, a place of silent, unseen hunters, and of sudden, cataclysmic violence. 2 new weapons in particular forever changed the nature of war at sea. The first was the naval mine. Imagine not a single explosion, but tens of thousands of them, waiting silently beneath the waves. Both the British and the Germans began to sow these deadly gardens in immense, sprawling fields across the North Sea, attempting to blockade each other's ports and to deny passage to each other's ships. The mine was an unblinking, indiscriminate killer. It was a patient, moored weapon, a sphere of steel packed with high explosives that made no distinction between a warship and a fishing boat, between a passenger ferry and a neutral merchant vessel. It simply waited, its sinister, spiky horns protruding just below the surface, for the gentle touch of a passing hull to unleash a devastating, hull-shattering blast. The sea was no longer an open space. It was a treacherous, invisible maze where a wrong turn or a moment of miscalculation could lead to instant, fiery annihilation. The second, and perhaps more terrifying innovation, was the submarine, the German U-boat. Here was a weapon that seemed to defy the very nature of sea power, which had for so long been about visibility, about showing the flag. The U-boat was a hunter that thrived on stealth and invisibility. It was a slender, cigar-shaped vessel of steel that could slip beneath the surface, moving through the depths with a quiet, menacing grace, stalking its prey through the narrow eye of a periscope. For the crews of merchant ships, the U-boat introduced a new and deeply unsettling form of dread. A ship could be steaming under a calm sky, on a perfectly flat sea, with no other vessel in sight. And then, without warning, a thin white trail would appear in the water, the wake of a torpedo, followed moments later by a catastrophic explosion that could send a ship to the bottom in minutes. It was a cold, clinical, and terrifyingly effective form of warfare that spread a deep and pervasive anxiety across all the shipping lanes. The great surface fleets, however, still represented the ultimate expression of national power. The British Grand Fleet and the German High Seas Fleet were the 2 most powerful naval forces the world had ever seen. Vast collections of immense, heavily armoured battleships known as dreadnoughts. For much of the war, these two colossal fleets watched each other warily from their protected bases. The British at Scapa Flow in the Orkney Islands, and the Germans at Wilhelmshaven, Wilhelmshaven. They were like two giants, hesitant to engage in a final, decisive battle that could risk everything. But on the last day of May, in 1916, near the coast of Denmark's Jutland Peninsula, that moment finally came. The Battle of Jutland was not a battle in the way previous naval conflicts had been. It was a sprawling, chaotic, and often confusing clash of titans, fought over hundreds of square miles of sea, in shifting visibility and fading light. It was a brutal, cataclysmic encounter between more than 250 warships. Imagine the sheer, overwhelming sensory experience. The endless, deafening thunder of the great guns, firing shells the weight of a small automobile over distances of more than 10 miles. See the colossal fountains of water, hundreds of feet high, erupting from the sea as the shells landed, and the flash of brilliant, horrific orange as a shell found its mark. In this terrifying crucible, the mighty ships, these symbols of industrial might, revealed a shocking vulnerability. The British battlecruiser HMS Invincible, a fast and powerful ship, was struck by a salvo from the German vessel SMS Lutzow. A shell penetrated one of its gun turrets and ignited the cordite propellant within, causing a flash fire that travelled down to the ship's main magazines. The result was an instantaneous, cataclysmic explosion that broke the great ship in two. She sank in moments, taking over 1,000 men with her, their lives extinguished in a single fiery instant. The Lutzow, too, though victorious in that duel, was so heavily damaged, taking on so much water, that she became impossible to save. Her own crew had to abandon her, and she was sunk by a German torpedo boat to prevent her from falling into enemy hands. For a day and a night, this brutal, bloody, and ultimately inconclusive battle raged, and when the fleets finally disengaged, they left behind a sea littered with the smoking, twisted wreckage of 25 ships and the bodies of nearly 10,000 sailors. The Great War at Sea did not end with a final, climactic battle, but with a strange and silent surrender. In November of 1918, defeated on the battlefields of France, Germany was forced to sail its magnificent high seas fleet, the pride of the nation, into the British naval base at Scapa Flow, to be interned, its fate to be decided by the victorious Allies. For months, the German ships lay at anchor, a fleet of ghosts, their crews watching and waiting. Then, on a summer's day in 1919, believing they were about to be betrayed, their commander gave a final secret order. Across the fleet, sailors opened the seacocks, the valves that let in the sea, and scuttled their own ships. One by one, the great, proud vessels, the veterans of Jutland, slowly listed, rolled over, and sank to the bottom of the calm, sheltered anchorage in a final, defiant act of naval suicide. The Great War was over, but the North Sea was now more crowded with wreckage than ever before, a vast, silent graveyard of the First Industrial War. And after a brief and deeply uneasy peace, it would be called upon to serve as a battlefield once more. The 20 years of peace that followed the Great War were but a brief, fretful interlude. A pause for breath before the world plunged once more into conflict, and the North Sea, which had barely begun the slow, patient work of settling the wrecks of the First War into its soft, muddy bed, was destined to become a battlefield all over again. The Second World War was a continuation of the First in many ways, but it was fought with a new and terrifying intensity, fueled by even more advanced and lethal technology. The sea and the sky became a single, unified battle space, where the fates of ships were decided not only by torpedoes from below, but by bombs from above. The submarine, the dreaded U-boat, returned to its hunting grounds, now more sophisticated, with longer range and deadlier torpedoes. But this time, it was not alone in its deadly work. Long-range bomber aircraft now roamed the skies above the sea, their crews scanning the waves for the dark silhouette of a ship to attack. For the merchant mariners struggling to keep Britain's vital supply lines open, the threat was now three-dimensional. A lookout had to scan the horizon, not just for the feather of a periscope, but also for the glint of sunlight on a distant aircraft's wings. The sea itself was once again seeded with mines, now more advanced and harder to detect, including sinister magnetic mines that could be dropped from aircraft and would detonate not on contact, but when they sensed the metallic hull of a ship passing overhead. One of the countless tragedies of this relentless war of attrition was the story of a vessel that was not a mighty battleship, but a humble fishing trawler conscripted into military service. The German patrol boat Vive 1302, originally the civilian fishing boat John Mahon, was on patrol off the coast of the Netherlands in 1942. She was a small vessel performing a routine and dangerous duty. It was on such a patrol that she was spotted by Royal Air Force fighter bombers. For the pilots, she was simply a target, an enemy vessel to be removed. For the crew of the John Mahon, it was a sudden, roaring descent of terror from the sky. The attack was swift and brutal, and the small patrol boat was sunk, taking 11 of her crew with her to the bottom. Just one of thousands of small, violent, and largely forgotten encounters that defined the daily reality of this new war at sea. But amidst the widespread carnage, the North Sea also became the stage for moments of incredible, desperate heroism. In the late spring of 1940, the British and French armies were in full retreat, trapped against the coast of France at the port of Dunkirk, their backs to the sea and the German army closing in. Their complete destruction seemed certain. It was then that one of the most remarkable and courageous episodes in maritime history unfolded. A call went out across the English Channel, a plea for any vessel that could float to help evacuate the stranded soldiers. And Britain answered. An incredible, makeshift armada set sail. Royal Navy destroyers sailing alongside paddle steamers, fishing trawlers, private yachts, and small river ferries. For 9 days, this flotilla of little ships braved constant air attack and the threat of submarines, shuttling back and forth across the choppy, dangerous waters, plucking soldiers from the beaches and piers. They rescued over 300,000 men, a miraculous evacuation that turned an absolute military catastrophe into a symbol of profound national resilience. A victory snatched from the jaws of defeat upon the waters of the North Sea. The war also saw acts of incredible, calculated audacity. In February of 1942, the German Navy undertook one of the most daring operations of the war. 2 of their most powerful battleships, the Scharnhorst and the Gneisenau, Gneisenau, along with the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen, Eugen, were trapped in the French port of Brest. Rather than risk the long, dangerous journey around Scotland, they chose the most direct and most dangerous route home, straight through the heavily defended English Channel. Under the cover of bad weather and a massive aerial umbrella of fighter aircraft, the German squadron steamed at high speed through the very heart of enemy territory. The Channel Dash, as it became known, was a stunning success for the Germans, and a source of immense frustration for the British, who struggled to mount a coordinated attack in time. It was a bold, brilliant gamble that demonstrated the changing nature of naval warfare, where air power had become the essential key to controlling the surface of the sea. For 6 long years, this brutal conflict raged, from the shores of Norway down to the white cliffs of Dover. And when the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the North Sea was left more scarred, more crowded with the silent dead than ever before. Thousands upon thousands of ships, from the mightiest battleships to the smallest patrol boats, lay broken and rusting in the darkness, their hulls slowly being colonized by the patient life of the sea. And scattered across the seabed, mingled with the wrecks, lay a terrifying legacy. Millions of unexploded bombs, shells and sea mines, a vast submerged arsenal that remains a hidden and unpredictable danger to this very day. The great wars were over. The sound of cannon fire had faded into memory, but the sea had not finished its work. Even in peace, the North Sea would find new and devastating ways to demonstrate its power and to claim human lives. The guns had at last fallen silent, their echoes fading into the vast, indifferent quiet of the post-war years, and for a time it seemed as though the North Sea might return to its peaceful work of commerce and fishing. The great warships now rested in their silent graves, and the skies above were empty of bombers. But the sea itself, the ancient elemental power that had shaped the land and its people for millennia, had not been defeated, had not been tamed, and it was merely biding its time. The greatest danger was not to come from a new weapon of war, but from a timeless conspiracy, a perfect and devastating alignment of wind and water and tide. Imagine the last night of January in the year 1953. A deep and powerful low-pressure system, a vast rotating storm born in the cold seas near Iceland, was sweeping southwards. On its own, it was a formidable gale, but on this particular night its path coincided with a series of unfortunate and ultimately catastrophic astronomical events. It was the time of the spring tide, a period when the gravitational pull of the sun and moon align, causing the tides to rise higher and fall lower than at any other time. And as this great storm moved down the length of the North Sea, its powerful winds began to push a huge mound of water before it, a storm surge, funneling it into the narrower confines of the southern sea, precisely as the high spring tide was reaching its peak. It was a liquid battering ram, aimed squarely at the low-lying coastlines of England, Belgium, and, most vulnerable of all, the Netherlands. For the people living in the coastal towns and villages, the night began as any other winter's night, with the familiar sound of a rising gale, a deep and mournful howling in the chimneys, and the rattle of windows against the wind. But as the hours wore on, the sound began to change. The wind rose to a deafening, terrifying shriek, and beneath it a new sound began to grow, the deep, resonant, and unfamiliar roar of the sea, a sea that was rising far beyond its normal limits, a sea that was coming to claim the land. In the darkness, with the electricity cut by the storm, families huddled together, listening as the water began to seep and then to pour under their doorways. And then came the moment of utter, catastrophic failure. The dikes, the great earthen and concrete walls that had protected these lands for centuries, the very symbols of the long and arduous human struggle against the water, began to break. It was not a gentle breach, but a violent, explosive collapse. A sound of tearing earth and shattering concrete, followed by the deep, thunderous roar of the sea as it poured through the gap, a relentless, unstoppable torrent of black, freezing water. Houses that had stood for generations were swept away in moments, their foundations scoured from beneath them. The water rose with terrifying speed, filling bedrooms, swallowing entire villages, and turning vast areas of farmland into a turbulent, debris-strewn inland sea. It was a quiet, desperate, and lonely struggle in the dark, a story repeated in thousands of homes. Families climbing onto rooftops, clinging to chimneys, their cries for help lost in the immense, overwhelming roar of the storm and the sea. When the pale grey light of dawn finally broke, it revealed a scene of almost unimaginable devastation. The world had been transformed into a silent, brown lagoon. The tops of houses, the spires of churches, the skeletal branches of drowned trees were all that remained of a once vibrant landscape. The human cost was staggering. In the Netherlands, a nation whose very existence is a testament to the battle against the sea, over 1,800 people lost their lives. In England, more than 300 souls were taken by the flood, and hundreds more in Belgium and on ships at sea. The Great Flood of 1953 was a collective trauma, a wound seared into the national consciousness of these seafaring peoples. From that profound sorrow, however, came an iron-willed resolve, a vow whispered across the drowned lands: never again. This single event spurred one of the most ambitious and audacious engineering programs the world has ever seen. The Dutch, in a monumental undertaking of breathtaking scale, began the construction of the Delta Works, a colossal system of dams, storm surge barriers and dikes, designed not merely to repair the broken defences, but to fundamentally re-engineer their relationship with the sea. It was a project that would take half a century to complete, a shield of concrete and steel built to defend against a 1-in-10,000-year storm. Similarly, in London, a city brought to a standstill by the flood, the Great Thames Barrier was conceived, a row of immense gleaming steel gates that could be raised from the riverbed to seal the city off from a threatening surge. This was a new kind of war, a war fought not with cannons, but with calculus and concrete, a determined effort to finally impose a human order upon the sea's most violent impulses. And it was this new confidence, this belief in humanity's ability to engineer solutions in the face of the sea's immense power, that would soon encourage a new and equally ambitious venture, not to keep the sea out, but to drill down deep into its bed in search of a different kind of treasure. The great coastal defences, the immense barriers of concrete and steel, rose like a declaration that humanity would no longer be a passive victim of the North Sea's furies. This newfound confidence, this faith in the power of engineering to solve the most formidable challenges, soon turned its gaze away from the shoreline and out toward the deep, open water. The sea was no longer seen merely as a threat to be defended against, or a surface to be travelled upon. It was now viewed as a new frontier to be conquered from above and explored from below in the search for a new and immense source of wealth. A treasure not of gold or silver, but of rich, black oil and invisible, potent gas, locked away for millions of years in the deep rock beneath the seabed. The first whispers of this possibility had come from the discovery of vast natural gas fields on the Dutch coast in the late 1950s. Geologists began to wonder, could these same energy-rich rock formations extend out far beneath the waves? It was a tantalizing question, and in the 1960s, the great oil companies of the world began a new kind of exploration. They brought with them a new and alien-looking vessel, the offshore drilling rig, a strange, towering creature of latticed steel that would soon become a permanent feature of the North Sea landscape. The initial search was difficult, expensive, and often disappointing, with many dry wells drilled into the unforgiving seabed. But in the final days of 1969, a Phillips petroleum rig, drilling in the Norwegian sector, made a discovery that would change the economic destiny of Northern Europe forever. They had struck what would become known as the Ekofisk field, a colossal reservoir of high-quality oil. The boom had begun. Suddenly, The North Sea was the new Wild West, a place of immense opportunity and immense risk. A new kind of pioneer was drawn to its waters, not sailors or fishermen, but roughnecks, engineers, and deep-sea divers, a hardened generation of workers chasing the high wages that came with performing one of the most dangerous jobs on Earth. The engineering challenges they faced were on a scale that was almost unimaginable. They had to build and install production platforms, structures as tall as the Eiffel Tower, anchoring them to the seabed in hundreds of feet of water, in a place notorious for some of the worst weather in the world. Imagine the incredible difficulty of welding steel in freezing gale-force winds, of landing helicopters on pitching, spray-soaked decks, of living for weeks at a time in a cramped, noisy, and profoundly isolated industrial island, hundreds of miles from shore. The North Sea did not surrender its treasure easily. It fought back with its timeless weapons, with colossal, ship-swallowing waves that could tear equipment from a platform's deck, and with corrosive, salt-laden spray that relentlessly attacked every inch of exposed steel. The work was brutally hard, and the price of failure was terrifyingly high. Yet for all the dangers, the industry grew with astonishing speed, bringing unimagined wealth to nations like Norway and the United Kingdom, transforming quiet fishing ports like Aberdeen in Scotland into bustling, helicopter-filled oil capitals. It was a new gold rush, a testament to human ingenuity and endurance in the face of a profoundly hostile environment. But that environment was never truly conquered, and the delicate balance between human engineering and the sea's immense power was tragically and catastrophically broken on a stormy evening in March of 1980. The Alexander L. Kielland was not a production platform, but a semi-submersible accommodation rig, a floating hotel for offshore workers moored alongside a production platform in the Ekofisk field. On this particular evening, in the midst of a driving rain and immense waves, over 200 men were resting in its living quarters after a long, hard shift. They felt safe, secure in a structure designed and certified to withstand the very worst the North Sea could throw at it. And then, with a sound that one survivor described as a loud metallic crack, one of the rig's 5 massive legs, a great column of steel that held the entire structure stable, simply broke away. A small, hidden fatigue crack, likely present since the day it was built, had finally, under the relentless stress of the storm, failed completely. The result was an immediate and catastrophic loss of stability. The vast floating platform, weighing thousands of tons, began to list, slowly at first, and then with terrifying speed. Inside, it was a scene of utter chaos and confusion as men scrambled in the darkness to find a way out. Within 20 minutes, the immense structure had turned completely upside down, its remaining legs pointing uselessly toward the stormy sky, leaving a scene of tangled wreckage and desperate men struggling for their lives in the freezing, turbulent water. Despite a heroic rescue effort by nearby vessels, 123 people lost their lives that night. The Alexander L. Kielland disaster was a profound shock to the entire offshore industry. It was a horrifying reminder that even the most advanced engineering, the most rigorous certifications, could still fail. It proved that no matter how sophisticated the technology, no matter how great the rewards, the North Sea remains a place that demands constant vigilance, profound respect, and a deep, abiding humility. The search for black gold had brought immense prosperity, but it had also added a new and deeply sorrowful chapter to the long history of human tragedy upon these cold, grey waters. A history that was not yet finished. The humbling tragedies of the offshore oil boom, born from the struggle against the sea's immense power in the deep water, were sadly not the final words in the North Sea's long history of sorrow. Even in the modern era, an age of satellite navigation, of advanced weather forecasting, and of seemingly routine and safe maritime travel, the sea has found ways to remind us that danger can arise not only from the fury of the elements, but also from the quiet, insidious threat of simple human error. The most routine of journeys, a trip made by thousands of people every single day, could, in a few fateful moments, become a scene of profound and devastating loss. Let us turn our minds to the calm coastal waters of the English Channel, the gateway to the North Sea, on a chilly evening in March of 1987. The roll-on, roll-off passenger ferry, the herald of free enterprise, was preparing to depart from the Belgian port of Zeebrugge, bound for Dover in England. It was a journey the ship and her crew had made countless times before. On board were hundreds of passengers, truck drivers heading home after a long haul, families returning from a day trip, all of them settling into the lounges for the short, familiar crossing. The sea was calm, the weather was clear. It was a scene of perfect, unremarkable normalcy. But within the ship, a fatal oversight, a simple human mistake in a chain of routine procedures, had already sealed its fate. The immense bow doors, the great clamshell-like opening that allowed vehicles to drive directly onto the car deck, had been left wide open. As the ferry cleared the harbour wall and began to pick up speed, the calm water of the harbour began to wash gently onto the vast open car deck. It was not a wave, not a storm, but a quiet, relentless ingress of water. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. With thousands of tons of water sloshing across the flat, open deck, the ship lost its stability in an instant. In less than 2 minutes, the magnificent, modern ferry, in calm seas and just a mile from shore, rolled completely onto its side, coming to rest half submerged on a shallow sandbank, its interior lights still burning eerily beneath the dark, still water. The speed of the event was terrifying. There was no time to send a distress call, no time to deploy the lifeboats. 193 passengers and crew lost their lives, not to a storm, but to a moment of inattention. The disaster sent a profound shockwave through the maritime world, leading to sweeping, fundamental changes in the design and operating procedures of ferries everywhere, a painful but vital lesson written in sorrow. And as the years pass, another, slower and more silent threat begins to make its presence felt. Beneath the waves, the vast, silent museum of shipwrecks, the resting places of the warships from 2 world wars, the sunken merchantmen, the lost trawlers, they are not as inert as they appear. These wrecks are time capsules, not only of history, but also of hazardous materials. The steel hulls that have been slowly, patiently corroding for decades are beginning to fail, threatening to release their final, toxic cargoes into the sea. From the rusting tanks of sunken oil tankers, a slow, steady bleed of thick, black fuel can poison the water and the coastline. And more troubling still are the tens of thousands of tons of unexploded munitions, the sea mines, the torpedoes, the artillery shells, all of them filled with explosives that become more unstable with each passing year. They are a lingering, volatile legacy of past conflicts, a threat to modern fishermen, to cable-laying ships, and to the delicate marine environment itself. The ghosts of old wars still have the power to haunt the sea. Yet, amidst these modern concerns, there is also a new and profound engagement with this underwater world. A new kind of explorer now ventures into the depths. The marine archaeologist, the technical wreck diver. Armed with advanced sonar that can paint a ghostly picture of the seabed, and with remotely operated vehicles that can glide through the silent, crushed corridors of a sunken vessel, they are the curators of this immense, submerged museum. Their patient work brings these lost stories back to the surface. They can identify a long-forgotten wreck, putting a name to a ghostly shape on a sonar screen. They can recover a ship's bell, a simple, mundane object that can confirm a vessel's identity and tell its final, silent story. They are not treasure hunters, but storytellers, piecing together the final moments of these lost ships, giving dignity to the forgotten, and helping us to understand the immense, sprawling, and deeply human history that lies sleeping peacefully in the cold, quiet darkness of the North Sea floor. And having journeyed through that long and often sorrowful history, from the first fragile boats of hide and wood to the silent, rusting giants of the modern age, it is time for us to make our own, final, peaceful passage back to the quiet shore of the present moment. And so, our long journey through time upon the restless, grey waters of the North Sea is drawing to a gentle close. Let your mind drift back now, away from the deep, dark seabed with its silent, sleeping ships, and rise slowly, peacefully, toward the surface once more. Feel the gentle release as you ascend, leaving the weight of history in the quiet depths where it belongs, and returning to the simple, rhythmic, and timeless motion of the waves and the vast, open expanse of the sky. Our voyage is complete, and all that remains is to rest and to reflect upon the shores of the present moment. We began our story with the first light of dawn, and we end it here, in the soft, fading glow of twilight. We have travelled from the age of wood and wind to the age of steam and steel, and beyond. We have witnessed the courage of the first mariners in their fragile, skin-clad boats, and we have felt the ambition of the Viking warriors who turned this sea into their personal highway. We have seen the patient, steady rise of the merchant's cog, and the towering, intimidating profile of the galleon, its decks bristling with cannon. We have stood on the shores and watched the great storms gather, and we have felt the deep, cold shock of the North Sea flood. We have seen this sea as a source of immense wealth, of herring and of salt, of black gold and of vital trade, and we have seen it as a vast and sorrowful graveyard of ships and of souls. Through all of these ages, through all of these changes in technology and human ambition, the sea itself has remained constant. It does not know of the wars that were fought upon its surface. It does not feel the pride of the nations that line its shores. It is an immense and ancient and profoundly indifferent force of nature. Its tides continue to ebb and to flow, governed not by the commands of admirals, but by the silent cosmic dance of the moon and the sun. Its waves continue to rise and to fall, shaped not by the borders drawn on a map, but by the timeless power of the wind. It is a place without memory, and yet it is the keeper of all our memories. The North Sea is a paradox, a bridge that connects and a barrier that divides, a cradle of life and a final silent resting place. For every soul it has claimed in tragedy, it has sustained countless more with its bounty. For every ship it has broken upon its shores, it has carried thousands more safely to harbour. It has been the stage for our greatest follies, our most violent conflicts, and our most tragic mistakes. But it has also been the stage for our greatest triumphs of engineering, our most profound acts of courage, and our most remarkable feats of endurance. It has been, and it remains, a mirror reflecting back to us the very best and the very worst of our own human nature. Tonight, we have listened to some of its stories, the quiet whispers of the lost, the silent testimony of the drowned, and in listening, we pay our own quiet tribute. We honor the forgotten fisherman, the brave merchant, the young sailor, and the hopeful migrant. We remember the families who lost their homes to the flood, and the workers who lost their lives in the search for energy. Their individual stories may be lost to time, their names washed away by the waves, but their collective spirit, the enduring human spirit that has always been drawn to the sea, that has always sought to cross it, to understand it, and to live with it. That spirit lives on. And so, let us leave the North Sea to its endless patient work. Let us leave it to continue its slow, gentle erosion of the cliffs, its steady sorting of the pebbles on the shore, and its quiet, watchful guardianship of the silent fleet that sleeps peacefully in its deep, dark, and tranquil embrace. Let the sound of the waves be the final, gentle word of our story. There are no more facts to learn, no more dates to remember. There is only the slow, rhythmic breath of the ocean, a sound that has comforted and cradled and carried humanity for all of time. Let that sound be your anchor now, as you let go of your thoughts and allow yourself to drift into your own deep and peaceful sleep. Breathe in and out and rest.